Greetings everyone and welcome to this video on electoral systems. In this video we're going to be looking at the party list system. I think this is now the fourth or fifth video on electoral systems, so you should be familiar now with what an electoral system is. You should know about first past the post, AV, SV. You should be familiar with the terms that are on the board here: plurality systems, majoritarian systems, proportional systems, and you should already be familiar with some of the strengths and weaknesses. Now, this is a very, very different system to the one we have looked at before. And in many ways, this is the one that kind of feels like the most intuitive, but it's also the least used. So let's just have a look at what we're looking at today and where it's used and why it might be used. So today we're looking at a proportional system called the party list system, where broadly speaking, the percentage of votes equals the percentage of seats. So if, for argument's sake, you get 30% of the votes, then you should get 30% of the seats. That's the idea. And it comes with its own strengths and weaknesses. But what's quite surprising about this supposedly rather simple system is it isn't actually used in the UK at all. Like if you look around the whole the whole map there is no party list system here at all. There is a proportional system which is used over in Northern Ireland, which is STV, and I'll cover that one in a future video. But closed party list, which is sometimes called the closed party list or the open party list, but it's the party list, but isn't used. It used to be used when we were a member of the EU, and we used it when we were a member of the European Parliament, and we had to elect our MEPs, that's member of the European Parliament, in that system, which is why we're kind of covering it today. Technically speaking, you don't need to know this one for the exam because it's no longer a system which is used in the UK. But I think it's important that you know about this one because in many ways it's the obvious counter to first past the post. Rather than doing it on a constituency basis, it's doing it on a percentage basis. So I think it's a good one for you, an important one for you to know and to see to understand and to think about, well, why is it used and why is it not used, and its strengths and weaknesses. So how does the party list system work? Well, let's start off by looking at the ballot paper. And the most obvious change that we have here is rather than voting for a person, Bill and Bob or whatever, or Ben, you now vote for a party. So you can see here at the top now, whereas before it was like Arthur in the Conservative Party, now it's the Conservative Party, and here are the candidates, and so on: Green Party, Labour Party, Liberal Democrat. And then you vote actually in the same way you would vote in first past the post. You just choose your party and you put a cross in the box, and then the votes are allocated. Now, why is it called the party list system? Well, as you can see here on the ballot paper, each party has given a list of potential candidates. And in this particular case, they've given 10 because it tends, I think I had a map here. I did not. Let me just check. I did have a map somewhere. Have I lost it somewhere? Oh, yeah. When you use the party list system, you tend not to use the entire country as one massive constituency. You still tend to chop it up a little bit for reasons of representation of the different areas. So when we were a member of the European Parliament, this was how the UK was chopped up. So rather than tiny constituencies of about 75,000 people, we now have huge regions which are then allocated different amounts of MEPs depending on how many people lived in that particular region. So we can see here that the London region, which is geographically small, has a huge population, and so in fact it has 8 MEPs. We're going to come over here to the Southeast region, which has 10 MEPs, and we will see a face that we might recognize. Mr. Nigel Farage, the leader of UKIP and the Brexit Party, was an MEP for this particular region. So we expect to see a number of candidates in each area, which is not going to be like 650. We expect to see a slightly smaller number depending on the region. So that's why the parties have written out these lists of 10 names here. And then what happens is each party gets their votes and they are given their percentage of candidates, and it goes down the list, hence the party list system. So if, let's say, the Conservative Party get 50% of the vote, well, then they're going to get 50% of their candidates. Which five? Well, it's the first five, and that's why they're written out in this list system. So Arthur is almost guaranteed to get a seat, and poor Brian is almost guaranteed not to. They'd have to essentially get 100% of the votes for Brian to get in there. And so you can see here that the order that the list is written matters, and people that are higher up the list are far more likely to end up with a seat than the people towards the end of the list. And in essence, that is the entire system. The parties make a list, the people vote, whichever party, however, whichever percentage of seats you get votes you get that many seats, and you go down your list to give it to the first four or the first two or the first one or whatever it might be. And I'll just go through what I've written here on the PowerPoint. This is a proportional system. Parties create lists of their candidates in order of preference. The electorate votes for the party, not for the individual, and the votes are then proportionally allocated with the percentage of votes being the percentage of seats, and then we go down the list. So it's nice and straightforward. There is a more complicated factor to it, which is actually how it's done with something called the dehaunt formula, but I'm going to explain that towards the end of the video so I don't get kind of too complex early on. Let's talk about the strengths and weaknesses of this system. The obvious strength is it's proportional. Finally you get a system whereby the number of votes, the amount of support your party gets actually indicates the amount of seats that you'll get. And if I go again to a page I found earlier, which I think is this one here, if we had used a regional list system, which is a party list system in 2019, we would have got a very different result. This is the actual result. The Conservatives get 365 using first past the post. But look here, if we had used a regional system, they actually would have only got 288, which crucially is not an overall majority. The Brexit Party would have gone from 0 to 10, Labour roughly the same actually, 202 to 216. But look at the Lib Dems, they go from 11 to 70. The Greens go from 1 to 12. And now look at this the other way. The SNP go from 48, because of their concentrated support, down to 28, which actually better reflects their total percentage of votes across the whole of the UK. And if you now have a look here, which shows you the percentage of votes they get, the seats under first past the post, and the seats under, they're calling it dehaunt, and I'll come back to that, but the seats under the regional thing, you'll see it is far more similar to what the actual percentage of it gets. And it's never going to be exact because of the number of seats might not exactly fit it. But for Labour, you get 32% of the votes and you get approximately 34% of the seats. The Conservatives get 43% of the vote and they get approximately 45% of the seats. Whoops. Why is it not exactly the same? I'll come back to that in a minute. But this is a system, and the big advantage here, that it actually reflects the will of the people. It is a system whereby Parliament actually reflects the votes. You could argue that it is a lot more representative. But of course, this means that the Conservatives go from having a majority in Parliament, 365, to not having a majority in Parliament, 288. Now, this might come to an advantage or a disadvantage, your choice. We no longer have one party that can govern this country. Now, is that good? Yes, because why should one party get more than 50% of the seats and 100% of the control if they didn't get 50% of the vote? But now we're relying on coalitions. Now we're relying on parties making deals with other parties. And who does the Conservatives make a deal with? Well, they can make a deal with the Brexit Party, but that doesn't actually get them to enough votes. They're going to have to bring in quite a few different parties here. The Lib Dems would be an obvious one, hence why the coalition in 2010. If you add the 70 to the 288, you get above the 325, which is what you need. So that would be an obvious coalition. But at the same time, I'm sorry, I pressed the wrong button here. But at the same time, you could also get coalitions if the Labour Party got together with the Liberal Democrats and got together with the Green Party and got together with the SNP and got together with Plaid Cymru. I think we're approaching the magic number they need of 320. And so you could get a situation where the Conservatives, even though they're the most popular party, actually get shut out of government if other parties work together. Is that a good thing or a bad thing? I guess that's kind of down to you. It's good because that coalition actually has group support. it's bad, I guess, because the party that was actually the most popular has been shut out of actually being the kind of the ruling party. But it would certainly lead to a very different parliament and a very different politics in the United Kingdom. And ultimately, this is why voting systems matter. Because if we went, for argument's sake, from first past the post, which produces this, to a proportional system which produces this, you have transformed politics in the UK. You have massively weakened the Conservative and Labour parties, and you have massively strengthened the smaller parties, which would mean that the way people vote in the future would change hugely. It would mean you would have coalitions almost all of the time. And it would mean that politicians would have to compromise with each other a lot more, perhaps having nasty bust-ups in public or behind closed doors. And one party would not be able to dominate in the way that we saw in the Thatcher era, the Blair era, and perhaps maybe now in the Johnson era. It would be a completely different form of politics. Now, the last thing, now, if you've understood everything so far, then you've done really well, because it's a relatively straightforward system, and hopefully now you've understood some of the advantages and the disadvantages. What I would like to finish this video with is to just talk about the dehaunt formula, which is actually how you transfer the votes into the seats. And it's a mathematical thing, and it's a bit complex. So if you want to stop here, you can. But if you're up for it and you fancy a bit of kind of mathematical logic, then kind of stick with me. But let me just recap the basic points. This proportional system, party list system, is no longer used in the UK because it used to be used for the European Parliament. It's a proportional system where parties create their own lists, and then you vote for the party, not the individual. Oh, I've missed out one other disadvantage here, and so please don't stop watching yet. It gives a lot more power to the parties themselves. Because right now, if you wanted to vote out Arthur John Briggs and you lived in Arthur John Briggs's constituency, you could vote him out. If you got the whole constituency together and you wanted to vote out Arthur, you could do. But under this system, all the power of selecting individuals goes to the party, or to be more specific, the party leader. So the Conservatives are always going to pick up at least enough votes to get 1 seat. So Arthur, or let's be realistic, Boris Johnson, has a completely safe seat. That accountability of individuals is removed, and your ability to vote for an individual is gone. So's the MP constituency link. You might still have a region, so you might now know that Arthur is the MP, one of the MPs for the Northwest region, but you've lost that direct connection of my MP in my area. On the plus side, if you live in the Northwest, you've now got a bigger variety of MPs you can go to. So if you're a Labour supporter that lives in this region, you could go to the Labour MEP rather than being forced to go to the Conservative one or something like that. So there are advantages and disadvantages of putting this together. But it gives a lot more power to the party leaders. And it means that if you want to be a member of this parliament using this system, you've got to be friends with your party leader, because you need to be high on this list. And if you fall out with them, or you fall out with the system, whichever system that particular party loses, you could quite easily find yourself falling down that list, which does raise questions for how you become part of this political system, this political elite. You can't go out and campaign on behalf of yourselves. And I'll give you an example here from America. Alexandra Ocasio-Cortez, she went out and did what's called a grassroots campaign, amongst kind of individual people, and she managed to overturn the vote in the area where she lived and worked, and she was able to become a member of Congress. And she did it with support, but she did it. People voted for her because they liked her as an individual. She beat the system. She managed to kind of, in a way, boot the party out of the way and get herself into Congress. Under the party list system, with so much power going into the order of this list and the party that puts together this list, that ability goes, and you could no longer have that ability for individuals to kind of break through in the same way. And that is perhaps a downside. Okay, there's the end of this video. For those of you that want to leave now, I'm now going to go into the dehaunt mathematical formula. All right. Now, why is it not just a case of saying, well, you've got 30% of the votes, you get 30% of the seats? Well, the answer is actually because seats and votes don't divide that neatly. So imagine you've got, let's say this particular region has 10 seats and you get 33% of the vote. Do you get, you can't get 33% of the seats because there isn't 3 to 33% of the seats. If there's 10 seats for an area, there's either 3 seats or there's 4 seats. So how do you decide if you get 3 or 4 seats? You could round it, but then what if other parties round to the same thing? So what if 2 parties have 33%? They both round down. So where does this extra seat go? So we need some sort of system to convert votes to seats that keeps it as proportional as possible, but also accounts for the fact that votes won't always exactly, or in fact never, will exactly line up to the amount of seats. So they use a system called the dehaunt formula. Dehaunt is spelled like this, and he was a Belgian mathematician. He died in 1901. So this system's been around for quite a long time. And essentially what you do is you divide the number of votes that a party has by the number of seats they have plus 1. So let me explain what we do. So what we're going to do, this is a real election. This is it was one of the MEP one of the members of the European Parliament votes. So we've got Brexit Party here in the light blue, then we've got Labour, then we've got Lib Dems, then we get the Conservatives. Interestingly, the Conservatives came fourth in this election. They didn't like that. And then we've got the Greens, and we also got Change UK. So what you do first of all is you divide all of the votes, all of the votes by 1. Remember that number, 1. Which of course means you get exactly the same number. If you divide 10 by 1, you get 10. So they all remain exactly the same. But the point is 1. And then you look to see who has the most votes, and it's the Brexit Party. So you give them an MEP. So they've now got 1 MEP. And what you do is you take that number 1 and you add the number of MEPs that they have, or the number of representatives they have, to that 1. So now the Brexit Party has 1 MEP. So we add that to the 1. So 1 plus 1 equals 2. And now we divide their votes by 2, which means, of course, now that their votes get halved. So look here in round 2. The Brexit Party get the first vote, so now we divide it by 2. Everyone else's is still being divided by 1, which means it remains exactly the same. They get half the votes. So they've already got 1 seat, but now they've got half the votes. And now we look again. Who now has the most amount of votes? It's Labour. So now we give them an MEP. Now we add 1 to their number. So they had 1, their magic number was 1, but now their magic number is 2. So now we have to halve their votes as well. These guys are now divided by 2. These guys are now still divided by 1. Let's have a look again. Who's got the most votes? It's now the Liberal Democrats, which means they now get an MEP, congratulations, and we divide their votes in half. So now we come back over here, and now we look again. And now the Brexit Party is back at top. Even though their votes were divided in 2, they now still have the most amount of votes in our new tally. So congratulations. Now they get another MEP. So they've now got 2 MEPs. The Labour Party has 1 and the Liberal Democrats have 1. But of course, now their number goes up by 1. So now we divide their votes by 3 rather than 2. And you can see here it gets divided. So now we look again, and the Labour Party will get the next one. Theirs will be divided down, and so on, and it keeps going down. It depends how many seats there are available. So if there's only 4 seats available, we stop there. Note the Conservative Party never got one. But if you carry on down, for argument's sake, if you say you had 10 seats, and I'm not going to blow this up too big, but eventually the Conservative Party would get a seat. They would get here the 6th one, and then it would be divided into 2. So if there were 10 seats, this is how it would end up being allocated. 3 for Brexit Party, 3 for Labour, 2 for the Lib Dems, 1 for the Conservatives, and 1 for the Greens, which is roughly proportional to the initial votes that they got. And it uses the dehaunt formula. Now, you shouldn't be, I'll rephrase, you won't be tested on the dehaunt formula in your exam. However, it is a nice bit of AO1 knowledge that you could take in to show off your additional knowledge. And it's also just a nice way of understanding how this electoral system works. But of course, go back to what I said about first past the post. Some people argue first past the post is good because it's simple. Compare that to the dehaunt formula and trying to explain that to the electorate. Whilst this is more proportional, whilst this does represent the country better, it is not actually an easy system to understand the intricacies of. And it does throw a lot more power to the parties themselves rather than the individuals. So what do you think? Do you prefer it first past the post, even with its downsides, or do you think actually first past the post is now starting to look a little bit more healthy? Up to you. In the next video, we'll be looking at STV, which is our other proportional system, that's the one that they use in Northern Ireland. A little bit more complex still. If you've enjoyed this, please like the video and follow the channel, and I'll see you soon. Thanks very much. Bye.